Our guest this evening, her name is Aptucxet. She's an award-winning container gardener designer. She's worked in gardening industry for over 30 years. You seem too young. From the cradle, I guess. Starting with her first job in the greenhouse at age 13 until the present as owner of the Aptucxet Garden. Deborah works with clients throughout New England who want their homes to be beautiful, not typical. By combining unusual plant material and creative design ideas, she creates gardens and containers that are truly one of a kind. Deborah lives in Massachusetts, and she's a Massachusetts certified horticulturist and a Massachusetts certified landscape professional. Deborah is a frequent lecturer on creative container gardening, speaking at the New England Spring Flower Show, as well as the Philadelphia International Flower Show. She also teaches classes and workshops at the Arnold Arboretum in Boston. Her work has been featured in the Boston Globe, Garden Gate, and the New England Home magazines, as well as on TV shows New England Dream Home. And you can find her work. She has a website called thecapturedgarden.com.
Yeah.
Thank you. As Laura said, I own the Captured Garden, and we're always on the lookout for really cool plants and really neat design ideas. But I want to talk to you tonight about container gardening. Anybody else here love container gardening? Okay. Well, the real name of my talk is jaw-dropping, traffic-stopping, get your neighbors talking containers. But that wasn't going to fit on the screen. So that's the abbreviated version, creative approaches to container gardening. But what is container gardening? So I Googled it, and it is growing plant material in something other than the ground. Okay? So with that in mind, I think I've been container gardening since kindergarten. We all remember the beans in the cup that your teacher had you do, right? Well, I know too, let's see, it's 7:30. If you're like me, you're getting a little sleepy, so we're going to have some audience participation. You ready? We're going to have a small test. There's no grades. Don't worry about that. I'm going to show you some slides. You tell me if you think it's container gardening, yes or no. Ready? Container gardening, yes or no? Yes. Of course. I got my little pointer here. We have sedums, as we just heard about. We've got a lunchbox, which is a very unusual container, but it's growing in something other than the ground. Container garden. Well, it's not growing in the ground. It's a raised bed, so I kind of consider that somewhat of a container gardening. Would it help you if I told you this was February?
February where?
Yeah, exactly. Not in Florida. This is February in New England. So, does that make you a little suspicious? Yes, these are fake. And I tell you, this was, as you can see from this sign, this was at the gas station in the town that I used to live in. And I'm convinced this guy almost caused accidents because people would be driving by and all of a sudden they go, and you see these bright yellow flowers. So this is not a container garden. This stuff is not really alive. Container garden. You think? Look carefully at that geranium. I think this is also February, too. I probably should tell you. So, yes, a container, nothing really growing in it. Container gardening. This is my pot. This is one of my favorite pots. I am a big galvanized metal kind of gal. And what I do in the spring is I plant baby lettuces. I just get a bunch of mixes, throw them in there, grow them, put it by the kitchen door, snip, snip, instant salad. So that's a container garden, and you'll see that container a little bit later. Container garden? You guys recognize the gas station. You know. I'm not going to fool you again, am I? Okay, so that's not a container garden. Let's talk about the containers real quickly, though. So you're awake now, right? Everybody's awake. We know what is a container garden. Let's just talk briefly about the container, and we'll go a little bit quickly over materials. So we all know this is terracotta, one of my favorite types of materials for container gardens. It's great because it's got aged patina. It comes in a lot of different shapes, a lot of different styles. I think its benefit is also a con, if you will. The walls of terracotta are very porous, which allows a lot of airflow, which is great for some plants. I only grow my basil in terracotta. A lot of your Mediterranean plants, your rosemaries, your lavenders, this is a great material because it allows the air to go through, and because they don't like to have wet roots. But the very fact that the air goes through means what? They dry out quickly. So that's one of the problems with terracotta. It dries out pretty fast. And the other thing is it's not winterproof. Do we all know that? Have we all learned the hard way? Yes. So not winterproof either. If you do like terracotta, and I especially like, I love the patina on it. One of the things you can do if you buy a new pot is paint sour milk or buttermilk or yogurt on it, and it helps it to age quicker. But terracotta is not necessarily the choice that I would make, the first choice when I'm looking at a material for a container. Wood is another great material. The nice thing is it can be stained or painted to go with your house. A drawback is it's really kind of limited as to what kind of shapes you can have. Most of them tend to be square, and it will require some kind of maintenance. We oftentimes like to plant in wine boxes, you know, the wine crates. And those are great, but you know they're only going to last a couple years. So, stone, another beautiful material, and you can see you go everywhere from very ornate, you know, old-fashioned to very sleek and contemporary. So stone is a great material. As far as some of its cons, very heavy. Anybody have stone planters? You move them once, am I right? I have this client, and she's got the big urns, the big pillars, and she's got these huge pots. And I said, yeah, we're going to put those in the center the first time because we don't want to keep moving them around. Very, very heavy, and also borderline on the winterproof. I'm very careful when I plant stone. I have a lot of clients that have the campagna, and some insist that before winter we take all the soil out. There are others who have planted in and left it over the winter, and so far we've not had any cracking, but I don't often recommend this through the winter because you just never know with the stone. Unlike the metal, you can have a metal container that will last through the winter. It's not going to be a problem if it gets frost or gets frozen. The one problem I see with metal, though, is rust. Oftentimes you can get rust, you can get scratches, you can get dents. The problem with metal, too, if you have a bluestone patio, something like that, and you have the metal right on the patio and it starts to rust, it's going to stain your stone. So I always tell people, even the cast iron urns, don't ever have those in direct contact with your stone. Always shim them up a little bit. And what do you think I use? Because I'm cheap. Let me just qualify that. No, I don't use plastic, but I hate those little pot feet. I don't like those because to me they draw attention to themselves. I want you looking at the beautiful container, not the stuff at the base. So I go to a home improvement store and I just buy tiles, you know, little tiles that you get, and they're about this thick, and you can get them in grays or tans. You know, you can go to a garden center and pay a lot more, but you can go to a home improvement store and get something just to shim your pot up. So that's typically what I use. My favorite material, synthetics, also known as plastic. But look at the variety here. You have everything from very contemporary to more traditional to, you know, looking like terracotta. Many, many times when I'm doing my demonstrations, people will say, where'd you get that terracotta pot? And I'll say, oh, but it's not terracotta. It's synthetic. But nowadays, they look so real. I think all the pros of the previous materials the synthetics have. And with the additional benefit is that they're winterproof and they're lightweight. Just to give you a quick example, we do a lot of roof gardens in Boston. A new roof garden that we picked up, we brought up all our own planters. They were all the lightweight synthetics, so we could move them around easily. I was so grateful. It was easier to get them up in the elevator, all that. We also inherited another garden on Beacon Street, and she already had her planters in place. And she had the big, heavy, glazed terracotta pots. And of course, one of them had cracked, and then the plant had died, so she wanted me to remove it. It was heavy. It was so heavy, and her elevator is one of those, I always think of the Pink Panther. You know the little elevators that they're this wide and then they have the sliding door? So you couldn't even get the pot in there. We had to break the pot up, just very heavy. So if you're doing something where weight is a problem, stick with the synthetic. Once again, very, very frost-proof. But to me, if your container garden, think of the word container as half the equation, why not use something fun? This is a great example of an edible container garden. We've got Swiss chard, there's basil, there's parsley, there's sage. This is a galvanized metal chicken feeder. How fun is that? Now, I mean, it would look great, I'm sure, in a terracotta pot or a regular pot, but why not add a little bit of a twist by putting a fun container on there? This is another container. Seriously, I mean, this is from a restaurant that we go to eat often, and they serve their pizzas on it. And so I asked the owner, can we have a couple of those cans? I think he thought I was crazy, but he did give them to me. So here's just a very simple fall arrangement that I put together, and like I said, it would look fine in a pot, But doesn't this just add a little bit to it? And I talked to Laura. I know you guys do plant sales. I used to work in advertising, so I know that packaging sells, right? So if you had your plants and you put them in things like this, maybe you could charge 50 cents more. I'm just saying. So this is not my picture. I want to, this is not our work, but look at this little bread box. Doesn't it make that whole arrangement look so sweet? Now, if you're like me, if you go up in your attic, you probably have piles of old baskets or, just stuff like that. Rather than go to the store and spend more money, dig out what you have and reuse something. Let's go green and not be wasteful. And here's my favorite wash tub again, and I've planted it full for the fall. I've got some tiarella there, the foam flower. There's a variegated boxwood. There's a Carex. There's some Swiss chard. But that's a great container, and it's nice and big. When I do my containers, I like to put a lot in them, so I always try to make them as big as possible. People will say, well, that's pretty big. Do you have to fill the whole thing with soil? I always say yes and no. It really depends. I mean, if you have something really tall and you're just doing some perennials, you only need 8 to 10 inches of soil, so you don't need to put stuff in the bottom. You can fill it with soda cans or 2-liter soda bottles, or if you use the packing peanuts, though, make sure they're not the biodegradable ones. Right? Some people say, oh, I use those packing peanuts. Well, a lot of them are biodegradable now. So make sure, and also if you use the packing peanuts, I highly recommend you put them in a bag first. Otherwise, you're emptying them out there all over your neighbor's yard. They hate you, So, and also the other thing that this slide reminds me, we're talking about containers. The next thing I want to talk about is soil. The most important thing you can do for your plants. If you're taking notes, the only thing you need to really write down is use good soil. It's all your plants have to eat. If they're not in the ground, so their roots can't go out and get what they need. They can only depend on what you give them, right? So first of all, do not use garden soil. It's too heavy. You can't go out and get a shovel full of dirt. And don't go to the dollar store because they're having a big sale, the $1 a bag. It's probably not the best soil. So always use really high quality, good soil. People ask me, what do I use? It's really a matter of convenience for me. So whether it's Farfard, Coast of Maine, Miracle Grow, whatever I'm going by that they have. And I know we're all busy too. So sometimes you can even buy the mixes with fertilizer already in them. Keep it easy on yourself, a slow release fertilizer. So a little more audience participation. We have a great container. We know we're going to use good soil. Let's just talk about what goes in a container. Who thinks annuals go in containers? Raise your hand. It's so funny because I look at you all and you're like, I'm not going to unless she does. I'll put my hand up and I'm not going to be the first one. Annuals definitely go in containers, right? Okay, that's the given. That was the easy one. Now we're going to get tricky. Who thinks perennials can go in containers? Raise your hand. You know what? Plants are not that smart. They don't really know. If you put them in and you give them what they need, they don't know they're not growing in the ground. Of course, perennials can go in containers. I like using them because, to me, at the end of the season, rather than taking my whole pot and putting it on the compost heap, I put them in the ground. Or I'll say to my clients, hey, we used whatever in your pots. Do you want them in the garden? And they, no. And I'm like, great, I'll put them in my garden. So it's a win-win. Who thinks we can put tropicals in containers? Raise your hand. Why not, right? Once again, and sometimes people are a little hesitant to use tropicals because they can be a little bit pricey, but there's so many opportunities to overwinter those, which is why just until recently I had 2 banana trees next to my washing machine. But many tropicals, you can either overwinter them cold and dark or cold and bright. You certainly can use tropicals. Who thinks herbs can go in containers? I think spring, this is your best bet for your containers, is buy herbs. Because you can use parsley and your pansies and whatever, pussy willow. Guess what happens to the parsley in the summer? It's still there. It's still great. So you use it in the summer. Guess what is happening in the fall? It's still there. It's still great. And then what happens in November? Tabbouleh, right? I mean, so you don't waste it. Herbs are great in containers. What about house plants? Well, I'll have to tell you, I did an arrangement at the Speakers Bureau in Wellesley a couple years ago, and I had an arrangement, and this woman came up and she said, that is so lovely. And I said, well, thank you very much. And she said, but that's not going outside. And I said, well, yeah, my containers are meant to go outside. And she said, oh, that's a house plant. And I looked at her and I said, yeah. And I said, well, summer camp. right? I mean, your poor plants, they're inside from, May, September all the way to May, and get them outside. Let them play with the neighborhood kids. So there's so many things that can go in containers. Don't just limit yourself to annuals. We'll see some slides and I'll show you, but there's only one thing that I never, ever, ever put in a container. And someone one time guessed poison ivy, and I said, yeah, that's a gimme. No silk flowers, please. No silk. First of all, once again, probably February, right? You're not fooling anybody. And really, there are no blue tulips. So if you're going to try to fool me, at least use something that is growing in nature. I always say no silk flowers. I understand this is a hard time of year because our winter stuff is looking tired, but it's really still too early to plant. And even as I always say this, full confession, my aunt who lives on the Cape, I'm driving down her long driveway and I'm thinking, wow, they are way ahead of us. And I'm looking in the woods and I'm seeing all these blooming things and I'm thinking, wow, Aunt Mary, way to go. And then I see the tag blowing. It says, so I say to her, Aunt Mary, how can I tell garden clubs not to use silk flowers when you're using silk flowers? And she looks at me and she's very naughty. She says, well, the deer don't eat them. Which is true, which is true. She has the most beautiful peony and they never get mildew. I mean, it's amazing. But yeah, no silk flowers. Okay, so let's recap. We know we're going to get a great container. We're going to fill it with great soil. We know that anything can go in that we want, right? So we go to the garden centers. And I know, you guys are gardeners. I know this is going to happen. You go in with, I'm going to just pick up one or two things. Yeah, okay, see, yeah, you know where we're going. And the thing is, those garden center people, they are marketing geniuses. Oh, they're not dumb. They purposely put the most beautiful, smelly stuff right here, right? And you walk in, and then you kind of black out. And you come out an hour later, and you've got this huge bill. You're stuffing stuff in your car. You're hiding receipts from your husband. You don't know what came over you, right? And then you might often come out with something that looks like this. Now, maybe you think that's pretty. To me, that looks like someone who just kind of went in and went, and grabbed everything, and then said, I have to plant it, and put it all together. So, and this is just my humble opinion. So this is the nice thing about container gardening. You plant what you like. But to me, these two things right there make my teeth go on edge. So before you go, I'm going to give you some hints. Before you go to your garden center, plan and then plant. Okay, if you plan first and then plant, you'll avoid all those problems. And I think when it comes to planting, two of the most important things you want to think about, where is your container going to be seen? If you have an island in town that you take care of, or your house sits back on a hill, it's not where you're going to buy 4-inch material with the nuance of a purple stem, because nobody's going to ever notice that, right? If you're going by at 40 miles an hour, you have to go big, you have to go bold. And you can do that with contrasting colors or larger material, right? The second thing to keep in mind is your background. If you have a white background, and even now you put pussy willow out there, are you going to really pick up on the pussy willow that much? Probably not. Same thing if you have a red brick colonial and you do a Pennisetum rubrum, that purple grass, you're going to lose it. So keep in mind your background. It's going to be really important. I only tell you that because I've made that mistake. But this container to me, it's not mine, but I think it was not, they weren't planned. There was no plan before they went planting. And I think another thing is when you have a very busy pot like this is, keep the top simple, and vice versa. If you have a very simple pot, do more. What happens in this slide to me is your eye doesn't know where the focal point is. And also, I can't even really tell. There's allium up here, but it's just, because of the background, I can't really tell where the composition is. And another good point, and I'll mention this now, I often mention it later, but if you have a container or even a part of your garden that you're wondering about, I also do another lecture on contrast, take a picture in black and white. If you strip the color out of something, you will see if it's still interesting. And if it is, good for you. And if it's not, you need to add some more contrast. And one of the best ways for contrast is color. We'll talk about other ways of contrasting too, but opposite the color wheel, most contrast, close by, analogous, is more complementary colors. So the opposite of red is green, and the opposite of green is red, catching on. Opposite of blue is orange. Opposite of orange, good, good. How about this one, opposite of yellow? Purple. Opposite of purple? You guys are good. So if you use those colors, that's why I think in the spring we see a lot of purple and yellow. And doesn't it just catch your eye? And that's because they're opposite on the color wheel. That's why when you see the cardinal in the tree, you kind of go, oh! You see the bluebird, it's like, yeah, whatever. You see the cardinal, it kind of catches your attention because of that contrast. So, use either contrast or use big material. This is what we would call a monopot or monochromatic, when you use one color in your pot and you use one plant. And that's where you'll see a lot of at resorts. If you see the big hanging baskets, it's just one mass of hot pink because they'll get your attention. So that's just one way of getting a lot of attention using a monopot. This isn't one of ours, but this is another good example of using one color, but using its tints and its tones. So for instance, you're going to use purple, but then you have the darker purple leaf of the heuchera, which you have the purple stem. Then you have the lighter pink, which picks up the purpley pink of the osteospermum down there. This is one of my window boxes, but it just shows you that you can use orange, but you can use peach too. So oftentimes when I'm meeting with a client, there are some that we'll do 20 pots for. And we talk about color, we talk about what's our scheme this year, and we might say purple and orange. That way the pots by the pool, by the garage, they all look the same, but instead of just purple and orange, it also means lavender and peach. So keep that in mind. If you're coming up with a color scheme, to me, it keeps things feeling cohesive. This is another client. Now, this is interesting because what's the opposite of purple? Good. What's the opposite of yellow? Good. So, but you know what? It's not just flowers. Think of foliage colors. So yellow-green, right? The yellow-green of this lemon sage works against this purple. But also the thing you don't notice in this slide, these were yellow twig dogwood. So you can use your stems, you can use your twigs to bring in contrast as well. So here you'll see in this, you've got scabiosa, which is a perennial. You've got your pansies, you've got your sage, and you've got some thyme. So those are the herbs. And I think in another slide, I'm going to show you this container in the summer, and the herbs are still in there. We just moved them around. This is a fall container arrangement, and I kind of like it because in the fall, we typically think of rusts and yellows and maroons. I liked this because it was kind of more of the pink. So we went with the deeper pink, and then we kind of made it a little bit lighter, and then we got the darker of the heuchera here, and we carried this pot over to this pot by using these pansies. And then we have a juncus here. But this is kind of a shady entryway to her porch. And when you have darker colors in an entryway that they recede, you can almost lose them, which is why we introduced the variegation of this iris. So the white and the lighter colors gave that pink and red something to kind of contrast against. Does that make sense? But the nice thing, let's just talk quickly, the nice thing about this container, what happens in mid-October or end of October? Iris goes in the ground. Sedum, which you mentioned, sedum, another great plant for containers, that goes in the ground. Heuchera goes in the ground. Mum goes in the ground. Juncus goes in the ground. We throw out some pansies and, the cabbage to the rabbits, but we don't waste a lot when we use other things than annuals in our containers. Here's that same pot again, just like red and green are contrasting, hot pink and lime are contrasting. So you see that you have the sage back again, and then we have some alternanthera, there's some heliotrope in there, and then we have the pink petunia. This is a roof garden that we do in Boston by the Theater District. And I'm mentioning this too for a couple reasons. First of all, my other lecture, Crazy for Coleus, I told Laura I would mention some of my favorite Coleus. Anybody here crazy for Coleus? Love Coleus. If you're not, talk to me because I'll get you there. But anyways, this is a very windy situation, so we have to be careful because Coleus is not particularly wind tolerant. But what I love about this planter, it'll show you exactly what I talked about as far as what you can include. So look at boxwood, an evergreen shrub, right? Boxwood, boxwood, boxwood. Canna, a tropical, right? This is Chasmanthium, sea oats, it's a grass, perennial. And then we have a few annuals here. Now the nice thing about using these boxwoods, and if you have a large window box, it's nice to use some kind of an evergreen because I call that the bones. So you don't have to recreate the wheel every single time. The boxwood is nice too because it protects the coleus a bit from the wind. But if you have evergreens in your containers, if your containers are big enough, you have a really good chance of overwintering them if they're hardy to about 2 zones colder. So if we're about a zone 6 here, Find an evergreen or even a shrub or whatever that's hardy to about a zone 4. You have a very good chance of getting it through the winter. Just make sure that it's well watered, going in. This is now, if once we've talked about color, that's one way of getting contrast. After color comes texture, more contrasting texture. This is one of my gardens. So here we have the hosta leaf with the bishop's coat, and then we have some sedum here. All different leaf shapes and different textures to keep it interesting. So I actually have a picture of this in black and white. Do you think it's interesting? It is, because it doesn't really need flowers. It doesn't need anything. It has a lot of contrast in there to provide the interest. And truthfully, as much as I love flowers, I think we all do, you want to have to deadhead. You want to be a slave. I mean, tell you what, when I get home at night after being in my clients' gardens for 12 hours, and I sit down in my garden, I just want to have a glass of wine. I don't want to be out there with the snippers and doing all this. So I think if you do containers or gardens where there's an emphasis on beautiful foliage, it looks good all the time. So this is another roof garden in Boston, but look at the beautiful differences in texture. You have the coarse heuchera, the coral bells here, contrasted with the microbiota, and then this is corydalus, which is kind of like a bleeding heart, got the same kind of a look. But even the fact that, and this is a little bit of a hellebore peeking out, I think. These are all in containers. This is all a planter. But you have a little bit of a flower there, but if you didn't even have that, it's still interesting. Now what do we think of this container? Be honest, not mine. It is a big container. Now, I think that they got it right as far as varying the leaves, okay? So you have round leaves, you have strappy leaves, you have blade-like leaves. The thing that I think they missed on this one, I don't see a contrast in texture. Because even if you don't use color, say this was in black and white, do you see how everything feels very fine and wispy? So it's kind of blurry to me. I think if you had a big, bold, what if you had a banana plant in there? Or you had a canna, you have a big, bold leaf, because this is just all very wispy and frou-frou, and I need something to balance that. So that's where I find that that's not making it for me. This is a client I have who goes to Chatham for the summer, and so she doesn't want to be bothered with flowers. She doesn't want to have a lot of high maintenance. So what did we do? We said, let's go with greens. Let's go with low maintenance stuff. At this point, it was a kind of a shady window box. Let's see what we have. We have a fern, which is, a house plant. I'm such a rebel. And then we have oak philodendron, also a house plant. Have some ivy. Anybody know what this is? That's what it looks like a fig, but no, it's an oak leaf hydrangea. The nice thing is you'll find a lot of growers now, maybe they're finally catching on, they're making things smaller. So you can use, if you find these little small shrubs, you can put them in your window boxes or your container. And then lastly, here we have lamium. So what happens to this window box at the end of the season? Really? In the ground or my ground. Her ground or my ground, it's her choice. Lamium. In the house if she wants it. In the house if she wants it. The ivy, she can bring it in the house, or we can see if we can keep it through the fall. But you see, by not just using annuals, you're not wasting as much. And I look like a hero to my clients because they say, well, that's how much that window box cost, but gosh, every year my garden gets bigger, right? So here's another one. This is not ours, and I know you already mentioned the thriller, filler, and spiller. So we're all familiar with that recipe. Here's your thriller, your big plant. Your filler is your medium plant, and your spiller comes over the edge. This is where I want to talk about growth habits, and this is why it's important to know what your plants are going to do. You really do need to know, because when you go to the nursery and it's a little 4-inch pot, you don't know if it's going to turn out to be that big, right? So you need to know what it's going to look like. I think there's a couple ways of figuring that out. You go to your local nursery. Do you have a good local nursery here? Make friends with the people who work there. Bring them brownies or beer, whatever. But I always say a local nursery where you make a friend is the best thing, because they'll be able to tell you, oh, you don't want that. It's going to get huge. Or we're getting a shipment and there's 2 of them coming in. I'll put one aside. And even as a garden club, if you have an interest, for instance, I spoke on coleus last week, and the club said, where do we get good coleus? Band together and march into that garden center and say, my garden club is interested in this type of coleus. Can you get it for us? I think a good local nursery is great. And also the internet. If you're interested in a plant, Google it, and then Google the images, because you'll see how it looks apart from just the little 4-inch pot. Because I always say they're like kids. When they're small, you kind of look at them and you go, doctor, lawyer, convict. You don't really know when they're little, right? It's the same thing with plants. So this is another, I love coleus, just love, love, love. This is another of the thriller, the filler, and the spiller idea. And what I want to show you about this, what's nice about this, look at how beautifully they worked with their container. You got this echo, and it's not in your face, but it's kind of like the back of this leaf is almost the same color as that. So, you know, when we were talking about contrast earlier, we said the opposite of orange is blue and the opposite of blue is orange. Maybe there's not a lot of true blue flowers, but what if you have a blue container and you use orange flowers? Use your container to give you that contrast. You can do that as well. So this is one of mine, and once again, another coleus, love, love, love. In fact, I talked to some guy, he's like, he has a camp up in New Hampshire, and he's like, I just need to do an easy container garden. I said, okay, here's my recipe. Find a coleus you love, find a grass, and find a million bells. You know, the little calibrachoa. Find a great coleus, will give you that color, a grass will give you a different leaf shape, and a million bells will spill over. Very simple. This is, again, just important to know your growth habit. When I planted this pot, they were all very small, but I knew how they were going to grow, so I knew eventually they would weave around and work their way in. And this is just another example of how your color scheme can unite your different pots. So in this color scheme, we were doing red, white, and blue, but that doesn't mean that we had to use all the same plants. So for instance, here we have the blue-purple of the scabiosa, which is a perennial. Here we have some Verbena bonariensis. And here, one of my favorite plants, Roseanne geranium, perennial geranium. Blooms from April till October. It's in all the designs I do. It's just a phenomenal, phenomenal plant. So these colors, you know, and then we have the red of the coleus, picks up the red of the salvia over there. And has anybody used this plant? I love it. It's Salvia argentea, or hobbit's foot sage. Doesn't it look like a hobbit's foot? And it's all very felty and fuzzy. It's really fun. So I think also there's some Gora in here, like some white of the whirling butterflies to pick up the white of the Nicotiana. So, you know, that's just where a color scheme can unite a grouping. And, you know, don't give up if you have shade. People think, oh, shade, I have nothing to do, it's shade, it's impatience. And then they hear downy mildew and they get nervous. Shade doesn't just have to be impatience. This was one of my window boxes, and my favorite color is green, and I think green and white feels so crisp. And these are impatiens, but I love, they're the rosebud impatiens. Aren't they beautiful? And I just love the caladium. I use that in a lot of my containers. It's a great shade plant for color, just like the coleus, you know, and it comes in pinks and whites and reds. And so here's another shade container. It's not boring. It's not what you would expect, right? But this is an upright fuchsia, Gartenmeister. Oftentimes we see the fuchsias in the hanging basket. But they have some beautiful upright fuchsias, so I just took that coral color and I mimicked it down here with these impatiens. These are the New Guinea impatiens. Then there's an asparagus fern, and then there's another little house plant. It's fun when you go to the garden center and you realize, oh my gosh, I don't have to stick in with the annuals. Find a plant you love, and then go to the edible section, go to the perennial section, and match it. And do it while you're there. Don't spend your money. Get your wagon. Get even a pot that's about the same size as your pot. These garden people are going to hate me. And then put stuff, arrange it there. That way you don't get it home and think, oh gosh, what am I going to do with this? Put it all together there. They're not going to matter about that. Don't despair if you have a small space. That is a tiny balcony. When the owners had me come out there, I thought, are you kidding me? It was so tiny. Their list was this long, and the balcony was about this big. They wanted a seating area. They wanted a tree to block the sun. They wanted a grill. And I was like, are you serious? But that's the perfect place for containers. You know, if you put a few well-positioned containers in there, it actually makes the space feel bigger. We did get the birch tree in there. It was fun going up the elevator, but we got everything in there. I think these are actually perfect spots for container gardens. You know, a lot of your younger people in the urban areas, they want to grow food. They want their kids to know about food, but they don't have a garden like some of us do. So what do? You grow it in containers. There's nothing you can't grow in a container. Edibles in containers are going to be huge this year. You probably even see in a lot of your catalogs, they have ones that are specially made now for pots. They stay smaller. And don't despair if you have a large space. Just like the containers on the previous slide made the space feel bigger, these planters that we custom built make this massive space feel more intimate. This is a 2,200 square foot roof garden. with 330-degree views of, that's the north end, and then we sweep around and we see the Bunker Hill Monument, and then we sweep around and we see the airport. So it's in the north end. It's massive views, beautiful, beautiful. But when I got there, it was this wide open space, and the wind whipped through, and it felt very cold and uninviting. So we built these planters to make rooms. And so this is the room that you're looking at over in here. We call it the Wine and Roses room, and all the plants are white because they go out at night because the sun sets over here. They have their wine. The white plants kind of glow, and they're fragrant. And you come out, there's a fire pit area, there's a dining room, there's a breakfast nook. This is the breakfast nook. So you come out the door, and she's got lots of blues in her living room. So we brought the blue spruce out so that you could, bring the colors out there. So you look out here over the airport. Over here is the dining area. But it's kind of like everybody seems to want great rooms in their houses these days. I kind of like having a little bit of mystery and kind of not seeing everything all at once. This deck was so exposed and so windy that we used the planters to actually make it feel more intimate. And even if you have a small little patio off your kitchen, but your neighbors are right there, put a planter there, and plant something so that you have a little bit of a screen, a little bit of privacy. So let's just talk about your containers. You've made great containers. I know you all will. And you've kept them going spring, summer, fall. And then what happens in the winter? Do you give up? I have to say, I feel like that kid from The Sixth Sense where he saw dead people, only I see dead plants. It's kind of like, it makes me so sad to see these gorgeous container gardens, and then come fall, they all get nipped by the frost, and the people don't even take them out. These dead mums are just like gnarled skeletons down the driveway. It's like, just remove those already. And I know that, here's another beauty, and the thing is, I think this is probably April. They had this in there, and it sat there. Now, if we had used evergreens like we talked about, you could have an evergreen shrub in there, and even if you chose to do nothing but add some pine cones, wouldn't it look better than that? I mean, I understand you're tired, and I understand it gets cold, but even if you just cut the dead mums and the cabbages out and pile on some pine cones, do something, but don't look at that, and nobody's fooled by that. I mean, winter can be long. I think we dodged a bullet this year. Can I get an amen? Yes. But last year, winter was long. If you have to look out your window at something November through March, don't you want it to look pretty? So for example, here we have all these dwarf shrubs. We just made a container out of them. This could stay like this year round. Or come spring, you can pop those in the ground. Why wouldn't you do something like that? Or something like this. This was another client, very contemporary. We just did very small dwarf evergreens, and we mulched the top with white rock. She loved it. It was better than looking at a bunch of dead mums. This is another client that we do it all up. She likes the colonial Williamsburg theme, so we did that. But so it's fun I think winter is an overlooked season sometimes, and I love decorating for winter. So if you do something like this, though, the only caveat is once it starts to look bad, get rid of it, okay? Because I had to walk by that planter for like a month and a half, and I kept thinking, oh, for crying out loud, someone just empty that thing. Because they're not going to remember how good it was. They're going to remember how ugly it is. And I'm supposing if you have pots in town that you take care of, once they start to brown, get the stuff out. And that's why I love using branches in the winter. Because if you have branches, and this is what I've done even in my own pots, the brown greens, you take those out, you leave the branches. Throw some moss down, or don't throw anything down, or put some pine cones down. But that'll hold your place just when we're kind of in this iffy time, right? Of course, right now, maybe in the next week or so, I've actually just bought some hellebores myself because I am speaking at the flower show next week, and I am doing a window box display. So it might be still a little bit too early, but there's a lot of very cold hardy perennials that you can use. So here, for instance, we have these hellebores, we have some lamium, and then just some pansy there. So look into when you're going shopping and you look at perennials, look for ones that are more cold hardy, the ones that will do well in the spring. You can oftentimes plant those at the end of March. Here's another example. Just, with the tulips and the daffodils and the parsley in there with the pansies. And I always love to throw something a little unexpected in, just the nest there. I think I kind of freak out the birds, though, because they're like, what? They go up there, they peck at the eggs, and they don't know quite what's going on. But I really think that early spring can be a bit challenging, but if you look carefully, you'll be able to figure something out. And the most important thing about container gardening, I think, is that you have fun. I mean, this isn't mine, but I loved it. It was so great, and I said, look at how creative these people are. They're not taking themselves seriously. Do you know what that is? It's something dead turned upside down. That's the root ball. Isn't that hysterical? I just thought that was great. I mean, it's some kind of Halloween thing. They've got the black mondo grass down here, but they're not taking themselves too seriously. And the thing about container gardening, it's not a huge investment, unlike your gardens. So you do it this year. You didn't love it, don't do it next year. Do something else. Or even if you do it and you think, well, I could do it better, take it apart. You know, there's smaller commitments of time and energy and money, right? So I just think the most important thing is that you have fun. And I hope that, you know, I've given you some ideas for jaw-dropping, traffic stopping, get your neighbors talking. And as Laura mentioned, I do have a website. So it's thecapturedgarden.com. If you come up with containers that you particularly love or you're proud of, send a picture. I'd love to see what you guys come up with, and I'll be driving around town checking it out. But I also have a Facebook page, and I'm also on Instagram. And I just want to mention I do have a newsletter that just goes out quarterly. I just sent out the winter, so probably in a couple months we'll do spring. But if you want to sign up for that, there's a sign-up sheet here. You can also sign up through the website, and I do have some handouts for when we're all done. But I just want to thank you very much for having me, and I'm going to answer questions if anybody has any. Thank you.